Yeah, hi everyone. So let me just get right into it. Perhaps you're familiar with the 5 stages of grief. It's a pretty well-known psychology model that describes 5 emotional stages a person goes through after experiencing a loss. There is denial, then anger, after that bargaining phase. It is followed by depression, which in here means just sadness. At the end, when a person goes through all of the stages, acceptance for the new situation appears. This model is pretty handy, especially considering the fact that every single person goes through smaller or bigger losses basically every day. Are you surprised? Let me use a very trivial example. How do you react when you see a pull request like this and you need to review it? And looks good to me, comment, doesn't do it. Be honest with yourself. Think about your reactions, what goes on in your head. Think about your thinking process before you actually sit down and do it. Probably it goes like this. Is he joking? Denial. He must be out of his mind. Anger. Maybe if I wait long enough, someone else will do it before me. Bargaining. Then feeling overwhelmed a little, exactly like people who are actually depressed, but in this scenario, it lasts just a few moments. At the end of the day, you accept the situation and you just do it. It's an emotional roller coaster every single time. Because you see, a loss doesn't have to be physical. It can be a loss of chance, loss of time, loss of energy, loss of comfort, loss of position, loss of control, loss of a dream, you name it. And each time we lose something, we go through all of these stages, every single time. So another situation that happens in our work. There is a new complex feature requirement coming your way, and it doesn't really make sense to you. Someone from the product even comes and say like, hey, how hard can it be? It's just a button. What are your reactions? You probably go through similar stages as in the pull request review, but each stage lasts probably a bit longer because it's a bigger thing. And why? If you don't see the purpose of this feature, the work you need to do can be perceived as a loss of energy or time. Now imagine that you need to develop that complex feature you don't really like, you don't really understand, in a new team with people you don't know yet. You probably feel like you lose your comfort a lot. The comfort of being in a familiar situation where you know the rules, you know the code, and the people. We tend to create this kind of comfortable boxes for ourselves. And there is nothing wrong with it in general. Because of that box, we can automate certain tasks, processes, or behaviors and do not waste time and energy on overthinking anything. We can focus on what really matters to us, the most important things. And for most programmers, the most important thing, like the most, is writing code. Pretty clean code. But if we like it or not, our work is not about writing code, regardless how perfect it is. So, do you have any ideas what our work is really about? There is answer people from the audience. Any other ideas? Speak up. Customer value, you're super close. Yeah, I almost feel like you know my presentation. It's about producing business value, and the business value is almost directly tied to money, almost always. And this might be more or less depressing to you, but nobody in business cares about code itself. They care about the value it adds. And this value helps them achieve their goals. And because we live in a dynamic world, business needs to adapt to it. It means constantly adding new features, constantly improving existing ones, sometimes pivoting the entire business model and starting from scratch. It often means that we are asked to deliver something fast and dirty. then keep adding complex features only to realize the tool is no longer sustainable and we need to start over. This can be massively demotivating because each time it happens, it breaks our comfort box. Sometimes it even takes the box completely. But let's get back to the code. We usually don't feel so attached to code itself. When needed, we refactor it, apply design patterns, move code around, extract microservices, whatever you like. We often refactor our own code, seeing how it could be done better now that we have more experience and more knowledge. We keep iterating with ourselves, we keep improving, and we see it as a normal life cycle of the code base. We work in cycles and we consider them normal, usually seeing them as well as opportunity to grow. So why do business-related changes scare us so much? There are at least a few reasons, in my opinion. First of all, it's all about the scale. The larger the scale, the longer the grieving process is. When it comes to that infamous pull request, you probably are fine over the same day. You were invested in the situation for a short period of time, so you also forget relatively quickly. When it comes to pivoting the entire project that you worked on for like a year or two already, it might take days, weeks, maybe even months to get comfortable with this new situation. Secondly, it's always a process, this adaptation process. The length and intensity of this process and these thoughts that you have depend mainly on your temperament. Your need for cognitive closure, adaptivity to changes. You can be in general very relaxed and go with the flow, everything is fine, or you might have very strong reaction to any new idea coming your way. The bad news is, it has biological roots, it's in our DNA, like eye color, meaning we can't really change it. But we can influence our behavior, and our behavior can be trained. So here comes the reason number 3 why business changes are usually so difficult for us. We are just not so used to them. But with some practice, we can make it easier for ourselves. And most importantly, we can also treat it as a learning process. This grieving model I started with was created by Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross in 1969. It was based on patients dealing with terminal illnesses. Later on, it was reviewed and some more elements were added. It was a base to create a change curve used to explain a typical response to a change in an organization. Because you see, each change, even the best one, means losing something. And because each loss means the need to adapt to a new situation. And this model looks like this. At first, there's shock, followed by denial. Then the anger phase, followed by uncertainty and confusion. The main difference is what happens after. People start dealing with their situation, perhaps experiment a little to see what the change really means to them. If the experiment goes well, they decide to stick to the change and carry on. And please note 2 things in this graph. How it affects motivation over time. Have a look at that. And secondly, the lines of this motivation curve or this change curve start before the actual timeline and end after. So when does it really start and end then? Never, absolutely never. It's a never-ending process. And because of that, there's an alternative title to my talk. Eat, sleep, chaos, repeat. This is pretty much what happens all the time. We just need to get used to it. And I think that maybe is a good moment to stop for a while and tell you something about myself. Matt already introduced me, but to give you some more context. Because it might be really odd to you that I'm standing here and I talk to a bunch of devs at a tech conference about grief, right? Super weird. So I started as a backend dev almost 10 years ago. I joined my current company like 2 years ago, initially as a dev, and then after a year I started to manage a team, and then another one. So I'm an engineering manager now. So I had chance to see the same setup and the same people from two very different perspectives. And the perspective of a developer is still very dear to me. I still remember how is it. It was also a time of changes and important projects going on in the company. In the meantime, as it was mentioned, I started psychology. I'm about to finish it next month, actually, so keep your fingers crossed for me, for my thesis, please. And I think I have a pretty unique perspective on IT, because like, how many technical managers who are also trained psychologists do you know? I feel pretty special right now, but it will not last long. Yeah, so I mentioned, the last year at my company was pretty intense. A lot of changes, a lot of projects, personal changes, like change of the position as well. The company I work for is called Job and Talent, and it's a workforce as a service product, present in 9 countries. Each country has their own legal and tax regulations, of course. Each client has different needs, and we keep adding new ones all the time. It's a Spanish unicorn evaluated at almost $2.5 billion at the moment. And if we were a fintech, we would be in top 10 considering the amount of money flow. And during 2022, the engineering team has doubled. So as you can see, it was an interesting year. What I share with you is based on my experience guiding people on my teams, backed by psychology knowledge. Because you see, tech is easy, tech is predictable, and tech is very rational. But tech is built by people, and people are not easy. People are very often not predictable, and people are definitely not rational. We're all different, but at the end of the day, we go for the same issues, we go for the same emotions. We just react to them differently. And we are driven by biology, if we like it or not, and it can spark some chaos. Getting back to the change curve. This is the original you already saw. Please note that if we start from a high note regarding our motivation, even at the lowest, we still have room to continue our work and be relatively enthusiastic about what we do. No issues here whatsoever. This typically happens when we start a new job at a new organization. But a new job, you see, is very often like a new relationship. We are hyped. Everything is amazing. Our partner is perfect. Life is wonderful. The world is beautiful. This is the honeymoon period. But when we already a bit stagnated, our lowest point can lead to nothing for a moment, until we get over the tipping yellow point of confusion. Once we get to this integration blue bubble, we often end up with more motivation than we started with. But what if it doesn't happen? What if we get stuck on the uncertainty, or there was not enough time for us to go through all of the process? Remember, it might take you even months before we can rebuild our comfort box, put some furniture in there and call it a home. We might end up in such a scenario. Because of some more changes that were added on top, we ended up out of scale. We are not productive. We just feel terrible. We don't know what's happening, and we don't like it, really. And being not productive makes us feel even more terrible. And because we don't have a constant flow of dopamine in our brains. Do you remember Siddharth's keynote yesterday? This is the opposite of ecstasy, exactly on the other end. But when we do feel ecstatic, when we have plenty of dopamine in our brains, this hormone makes us feel amazing. For a second, we feel like queens and kings. It's that feeling that you get right after smashing that annoying bug that was like bothering you all day. It's a dopamine kick in your brain that pretty much yells enthusiastically in your head, I did it, I'm amazing. And you can even say that's like, you also have like a mental Git repo in your brain, and this is like, I did it commit message. And in this scenario, none of that. Absolutely nothing. This is lowest than low. And unfortunately, I was there. My internal motivation was basically non-existent. I felt very confused, powerless. I also saw that my team was affected by this. They also felt similar. And I felt super responsible for them. So I decided to do what any psychology nerd would do, research, a lot of research. I started looking into papers on motivation, teams, teamwork, changes, anything that really could help me understand what we are going through. And a big part of the findings was the change curve that I already showed you, and acknowledging the fact that this is normal, just accepting it. I know that perhaps to a rational brain of a developer, it might sound like a new age nonsense, but once you name an emotion and accept its existence, it goes away much, much faster. So we know now what we feel, and we know it's normal. We might even start feeling a little bit better. But what's next? There is Lipit-Noster model for managing complex change to the rescue. According to this model, there are 5 elements needed in order to seamlessly introduce a complex change in an organization, meaning the change curve can be much flatter, much, much flatter. And the 5 elements are vision, skills, motivation, resources, and action plan. Ta-da! Easy, right? We are done. Obviously, the model by itself doesn't solve anything. But its authors not only differentiate these 5 elements, they also created a matrix of emotions that corresponds to a situation when any of these elements is missing. This is so. When there is no vision, we often feel confused. When there is not enough skills, there's anxiety. If we don't have enough motivation, there's resistance to change. If we lack resources, we feel frustrated. And if we don't have an action plan, it leads to a false start. The original matrix looks like this. Have a look. Now, please note that it can be read as a mathematical equation, where a missing element is X. This means that based on the emotion we experience, we can identify the missing element. That makes the entire process so difficult for us. So you can be a big help to yourself and to your colleagues in your team by naming exactly what you feel and figuring out the missing piece. Once you identify it, you can fix it. And here's a short guide how. Let's say you're confused. It means that you don't know or you don't understand the vision behind what's happening. At this stage, it's crucial to ask questions. You're probably not the one who can answer them, so ask around. Ask any sort of manager that's around you. There's always someone who should be able to answer the question. Because as a dev, you're not only entitled to ask questions, especially business questions, you're encouraged to. Answering your questions is also an excellent way to show others where are the issues, sometimes even revealing a blind spot. By asking questions, you can support your colleagues who perhaps have less experience and feel even more confused than you are. Just one question asked publicly can start like a domino effect in the crowd, a domino effect of communication, and it can have a very positive effect on everyone around. When we feel anxious, we perhaps feel that we don't have enough skills to fulfill the mission or certain task that is ahead of us. Bear in mind that imposter syndrome is a real thing, and it's not necessarily your lack of skills, but could be your lack of confidence. Statistically, more women experience it, but I also saw some men struggling, so beware of that. Either way, the best thing, if it's real or not, is to raise your voice. It's oddly comforting for absolutely everyone around in a team when someone acknowledges their weak points and asks for help. Think about it. If you're like a junior developer, you're expected not to know things. That's like super normal. But if you're a senior developer, this might be a little bit counterintuitive, but by acknowledging that you don't know something, you can actually gain more respect by your colleagues and bring comfort to the team. Why? Because there's no single person in this world who knows everything. This is true. And in theory, everybody knows that, but we rarely get reminders of it. So ask for help. There might be another person in your team who can help you. Very often, it's someone least expected. If anxiety is present among all of the team members, talk with the outside world. No problem can be solved if it's hidden. And remember, done is better than perfect, always, especially if it brings value. Don't overthink it. Now the resistance and motivation. This is an interesting one because what to do when it's already low. And in general, there are two types of motivation, internal and external. Internal one is the one that is that one when you want to do something for yourself. Nobody forces you. It just feels good to have it done. It's like the sweet spot for us to be in. External motivation requires external incentives. Usually it's things like money, prestige, or cookies and coffee. I don't know, whatever works for you. But the goal is pleasure and excitement. Do you remember the dopamine, this amazing brain hormone? We can hack our brains with it and spark internal motivation. If your organization doesn't offer incentives that can motivate you enough, you need to create your own. And such a list of incentives can be your daily reminder of why is it worth to stick to it and go forward. You can also put it on a post-it and stick to your monitor. And here are some examples, what you could use there. Once we finish the project, we will have less support due to lower number of bugs. I will spend less time on this annoying thing doing support and more time what really matters to me, like code. Or when I learn that new technology with this new set of people, I can be promoted to an architect position. And when I get promoted, well, amazing, but also I will earn more money. But it also can be something super small, like when I'm done with this particular task that I really don't like, I will order pizza and play my favorite video game. Yoo-hoo! It's all about applying some meaning to what you do, regardless how big or small it is. Frustration that comes from lack of resources. This one, I think it's really easy to communicate because resources can be anything that you lack to do your job. It can be a tool that makes your life easier, can be a comfortable chair, but very often what's missing is time. And time as like on a timeline or time as of amount of people that can contribute to the project in your team. That's why spending, well, some time, let's see it as an investment, on estimating things can play a very big role in any project or a large feature. And estimations are an excellent way, to communicate with any non-dev person involved in your project without actually forming any full sentences and talking about your feelings, really. Estimates are understood by business and they can take actions on them. Change the scope or the project, for example, or hire more people to help out, or even rethink the entire project. But to people who never program, estimations can look like this. You see, business is business, and business operates on dates, timelines, and deadlines. But when you think about it, an IT project is not different at all from any other type of project. Perhaps some of you, most of you went through like buying an apartment project. It's a massive project in our personal lives. You bought a new flat and the building is about to be getting finished. It's not ready yet. You buy it months ahead, you're selling your old place, you're setting out the moving out date, you hire construction crew, you're like book a designer, like there are so many different things and a lot of different people involved. Every single person has a smaller project that's part of this bigger project. So multiple people, multiple projects, multiple plans depend on finishing this apartment on time. Their changing plan, the plan of like just moving date is messed up. Look how many people involved have to adapt and change their timelines. That's why it's so important to set realistic estimates and realistic timelines. Because as we all know, deadlines almost never work perfectly because life is life. That's why adding padding to absolutely anything is crucial. Estimate things, kind of like try to be realistic, even though we are always overly optimistic, and then multiply it by 2, and then by 3. Seriously, you will not overdo it still. I told you this matrix is like a matrix of emotions. False start is not really an emotion, but when you're in a false start situation, you really feel it. You really know it that you're in it because you have no idea what to do. And perhaps I will not surprise you if I say again, speak up, communicate, ask questions, and talk with your teammates. Set up a 1-hour meeting or maybe a couple of meetings and really focus on building an action plan. It's really worth it. It can save days or even weeks for you and for the entire team and can actually speed up the process. So go and do it. And a good action plan consists of 5 elements. It needs to define your goal. It needs to list the tasks that are necessary. You need to identify critical tasks and assign them. Then you need to assess and improve. It's one of the reasons why sprint planning is done with the entire team. Sprint is kind of like an action plan for 2 weeks or a week or a month. And the daily is like the 5th step. It's like an iteration of what's going on and how the plan is going. But you can also create such an action plan for yourself, especially when your task is relatively complex and you don't know where to start. I can recommend pen and paper. We rarely use it these days, but many studies show that we use different parts of our brain for typing versus handwriting. Handwriting makes us more focused, sparks creativity, problem solving. It also improves our memory. So there are just benefits of handwriting. And a small digression here with lovely Elmo. I mentioned communication a lot. And I hope that you understand that when I mention communication, I don't mean what Elmo is saying. Your idea is terrible and you're stupid. That's technically a form of communication, but not a very good one. There are entire books, workshops, many resources on communication. It's a vast topic, and it could be a separate talk, a very long talk, series of talks. But here are some basic tips for you. When you want to express something that you experience, try to use I statements. They typically start with I, because they refer to me, followed by an expression of feeling. For example, I don't feel comfortable with this estimation. However, don't try to loophole this rule and say something like, I think this is stupid. No. Second rule, questions. Unless they're passive-aggressive, you really can't go wrong with questions. There are no stupid questions, really. Just ask. You need to understand everything. And whenever it's needed to communicate a need from your side, especially with business, for example, like changing that estimation, or add a time-consuming tech part to your sprint, or something like that, focus on risks. It's also a good idea to come with a proposal right away, and it might go like this. If we don't implement X right now, there is a risk of losing data in the future. But person A is an expert on this, and it would take him only 2 weeks to do it. Easy. If you remember these 3 rules, you can make your work easier because a lot of our work is talking with people, communicating with people. You can also make your personal life easier because next time your girlfriend asks you to go shopping with her to this terrible big mall, you can say something like this. Why do you need me there? I get easily irritated at the mall. If we go together, we probably will have a fight, risk. How about you go alone now and I meet you there in 2 hours and then we can go to the movies together? Win. So, TLDR, emotional roller coaster when facing any type of change is absolutely normal. Business is business, so just deal with it. And by acknowledging and naming your emotional state, you can identify what is wrong and then fix it. And the last one, communicate. And in case absolutely everything fails and you really don't know what to do, keep calm and carry on. Because at the end of the day, it's just a job. Thank you. May I have a small favor to ask? Can I take a selfie with all of you? You can be like Elmo.